Starting out this portrait, some of the things I was thinking about or kind of focusing on was that I wanted to kind of engage with a slightly different kind of rendering in this one. I wanted to have a really, really smooth kind of finish to the halftones that I was arranging. And I also wanted to engage with a kind of opacity in the lights that white chalk really kind of lends itself to. That being said, I also wanted to kind of push the boundaries of what that opacity kind of felt like, right? And so I was thinking about different mediums, I was thinking about different ways that I could kind of do that. And the conclusion that I came to was to use a kind of pigmented medium, right? So I was thinking, should it be watercolor? Should it be gouache? And then I eventually settled upon using egg tempera to bring out that opacity and even that texture into the highlights of this drawing. So the materials that I used were just regular kind of graphite pencils to start out. And I began kind of blocking it in with very hard leads, 2Hs, 1Hs, and eventually started to kind of build up into slightly darker values. Eventually, the softest graphite that I used on this was about a 4B lead, and that was to bring out some of the darkest accents. For the most part, though, a lot of the rendering and modeling was done in between the ranges of 2H and 2B. As always with a portrait, the planes and construction of the head are some of the most important things that you'll experience and that you'll go through in the course of the drawing. One of the artists that I follow quite directly in his thinking and his philosophy about portraiture is John Singer Sargent. He was well known to have scraped down paintings after a day's worth of work if he felt like the block-in was not attuned to the model. And in this case, I want you to pay attention very closely to that first stage where I do have only a linear representation of this model. That phase actually is not the place from which we derive all accuracy. The reality is that in the early stages of a drawing, we have some degree of inaccuracy that's acceptable. The thing that we want to make sure that we do have, though, is a good set of proportions, which is to say that the length of the nose, the width of the forehead, and the length of the head overall, these are the proportions I'm concerned about in the early stages. What I'm not particularly concerned about in the early stages is the gesture of the upper lip, maybe the overall kind of shape of the nostril, or for instance, the tilt of the eyelid. These things are way beyond my consideration in those early moments. I've also started now to express a little bit an idea of dimensionality within the drawing. So you can see that the down-facing plane of the jaw on the left, for instance, now has a kind of sense that it falls away from the front plane of the face. And while I haven't used value to do that yet, I'm already starting to attain a little bit of a sense of that roundness, of that volume of the head by indicating these planes with lines. You see something similar in the way that I've distinguished the top plane of the nose from the side plane of the nose, or the side plane of the forehead from the front plane of the forehead. All of these things are there just to hint a little bit at that idea of form, which is very much a part of recognizability, right? Remember this dichotomy that I established earlier on in our conversation about blocking in. I said that you have two responsibilities. One, to make it simplified, and two, to make it recognizable. Concluding this stage then, we should figure to have the basis for a proper search for accuracy. Now, that may seem a little bit like an understatement as far as your ambitions in this moment could be concerned, but I find that often working with students, some of the difficulty that they face in their drawing is that it can be sometimes too abstract, or on the other side of things, it can be a little bit too advanced. It can be a little bit too real. For example, I could have at this point have gotten into all of the eyelashes and all the shapes around the corners of the mouth and the hair that is sort of running over the skull. All of these things are details that I've chosen to leave out because they would distract me by becoming a little bit too concrete and a little bit too real. Simultaneously, I've tried to push the sense of light and shadow in the drawing so that there is a way to kind of figure out how my drawing does or does not resemble the effect of light over the forms of the model as we see her in this photograph.